The morning started like any other day on research station Kepler 442b. Dr. Taemin Park checked his instruments in the xenobiology lab while sipping his coffee. Outside the thick glass windows, the alien world stretched endlessly with purple skies and twin suns casting strange shadows across the rocky landscape. Taemin, are you ready for today's experiment? Dr. Hyojin Kim called from across the lab. She was adjusting the scanning equipment they would use on the mysterious crystals they had discovered 3 weeks ago. Almost done with the morning readings, Taemin replied, looking at the data flowing across his screen. The crystal samples are showing unusual energy patterns again. Much stronger than yesterday. Boram Lee looked up from her engineering station where she was calibrating the containment field. I'm getting strange readings too. The crystals seem to be responding to something. Maybe our presence? The 3 scientists had been working together on this remote research station for 8 months. They were studying the remains of what appeared to be an ancient civilization on this distant planet. The discovery of the quantum crystals had been the most exciting find of their careers. Taemin walked over to the containment chamber where 12 blue-green crystals floated in a magnetic field. Each crystal was about the size of his fist and seemed to pulse with an inner light. When he got close, the pulsing grew faster. Look at that, Hyojin said, pointing at her scanner. The quantum resonance just jumped by 30% when you approached. That's impossible, Boram muttered, checking her own instruments. These readings suggest the crystals are somehow aware of biological presence. But they're just minerals, right? Taemin frowned as he studied the floating crystals. Something about them had always felt familiar, though he couldn't explain why. In his dreams, he sometimes saw similar objects in vast cities under alien stars. He had dismissed these dreams as his imagination, but now he wondered. Let me try a direct scan, he said, picking up the handheld quantum scanner. Maybe we can learn more about their internal structure. Be careful, Hyojin warned. We still don't know what they're capable of. Taemin nodded and activated the scanner. As the blue beam touched the nearest crystal, it began to glow brighter. The other crystals responded, their light growing more intense with each passing second. Taemin, step back, Boram called out, her voice tight with concern. The containment field is fluctuating, but Taemin couldn't move. The scanner felt like it was fused to his hand. The crystals were singing now, a low harmonic sound that seemed to come from inside his head rather than his ears. The laboratory around him began to fade as images flashed through his mind. He saw vast cities of crystal and light stretching across worlds he had never visited. Beings of pure energy danced between the stars, their thoughts creating new galaxies with casual ease. And everywhere, the blue-green crystals served as bridges between dimensions, between what was real and what was possible. The field is collapsing, Boram shouted, but her voice sounded distant and muffled. The crystals broke free of their magnetic prison and began orbiting around Taemin like tiny planets around a star. Where they touched his skin, he felt no pain, only a strange warmth that spread through his entire body. Emergency shutdown, Hyojin yelled, rushing to the main control panel. But the laboratory systems were no longer responding to her commands. Taemin felt his consciousness expanding beyond the boundaries of his skull. He could sense every atom in the room, feel the electrical patterns in his colleagues' brains, perceive the quantum fluctuations that held reality together. The crystals weren't changing him, he realized. They were awakening something that had always been there, waiting. The last thing he remembered was the sound of alarms as his body collapsed to the floor, the crystals settling gently around him like guardian angels made of living light. When Hyojin and Boram finally managed to get the emergency systems online, they found Taemin unconscious in the center of a perfect circle of crystals. The quantum scanners showed readings they had never seen before. His brain activity was off the charts, but his vital signs were stable. We need to get him to the medical bay, Hyojin said, kneeling beside her unconscious colleague. What about the crystals? Boram asked, afraid to touch them. Leave them. They seem calm now. Together, they carefully moved Taemin to the medical section of the station. As they carried him, Hyojin noticed something strange. His hair, which had been black that morning, now showed streaks of the same blue-green color as the crystals. In the medical bay, the automated systems ran every scan they could think of. Taemin's body appeared normal except for changes at the cellular level that the computers couldn't identify. His DNA was the same but somehow different, as if new information had been written into the spaces between genes. His brain activity is incredible, Boram said, watching the neural monitoring display. It's like he's thinking at the speed of light. But thinking about what? Heejin wondered. For 3 days, Taemin remained unconscious while his friends took turns watching over him. They sent regular reports back to Earth, but the messages would take years to reach home across the vast distances of space. On the third night, as Heejin sat reading beside his bed, Taemin's eyes suddenly opened. But they were no longer the dark brown she remembered. Now they swirled with the same blue-green light as the crystals. "How long was I out?" he asked, his voice somehow different, carrying harmonics that made the air itself seem to vibrate. 3 days, she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "How do you feel?" Taemin sat up slowly and looked at his hands. He could see the blood flowing through his veins, could count the individual cells as they carried oxygen through his body. When he focused on the wall across the room, he could perceive the molecular structure of the metal, could sense the empty spaces between atoms. "Different," he said finally. "Very different." He stood and walked to the window. Outside, the alien landscape looked completely new to him. He could see energy patterns flowing through the rocks, could sense the magnetic field of the planet, could even detect the gravitational pull of the distant suns. "Taemin," Heejin said carefully, "what happened to you in there?" He turned to look at her and she gasped. For just a moment she could swear she saw galaxies spinning in the depths of his transformed eyes. "I think," he said quietly, "I became what I was always meant to be." 2 weeks after Taemin's transformation, the routine of research station Kepler 442b was anything but normal. Heejin watched from the observation deck as her colleague demonstrated yet another impossible ability. He stood in the center of the laboratory, eyes closed, while 12 pieces of complex machinery floated around him in perfect circles. "How are you doing that?" Boram asked for the 100th time, her engineering mind struggling to understand what she was seeing. "I can feel the electromagnetic fields in each device," Taemin explained without opening his eyes. "It's like they're extensions of my own body. I just ask them to move, and they do." The floating equipment settled gently on the workbenches exactly where they belonged. Taemin opened his eyes and smiled at his friends. The blue-green swirls in his irises had grown brighter over the past 2 weeks. "That's not possible," Boram muttered, running her hands through her hair. "You're manipulating magnetic fields without any external power source." "Maybe the crystals gave me an internal power source," Taemin suggested. He had been trying to understand his new abilities as much as his friends were. Every day brought new discoveries about what he could do. Heejin's communication console suddenly came alive with urgent beeping sounds. She rushed over and her face went pale as she read the incoming message. "We have a problem," she announced. "Long-range sensors are detecting multiple ships approaching our system. They're big, and they're not from Earth." Boram joined her at the console. "How big?" "The largest one is over 2 kilometers long," Heejin replied, her voice shaking slightly. "The others are smaller but still massive by our standards." Taemin walked over to the viewport and looked up at the purple sky. Even without instruments, he could sense the approaching vessels. Their energy signatures were unlike anything humanity had ever built. "They're not hostile," he said with certainty that surprised even him. "Curious would be a better word. They're here because of what happened to me." "How can you possibly know that?" Boram demanded. "I can feel their intentions," Taemin explained. "It's hard to describe, but their thoughts create patterns I can sense. They're scientists like us." 3 hours later, the alien ships entered orbit around the planet. The largest vessel, shaped like a massive crystal formation, took position directly above the research station. Smaller ships spread out around the planet, beginning detailed scans. Heejin worked frantically at the communication array, trying to establish contact. "I'm getting multiple signals on different frequencies," she reported. "But I can't make sense of any of them." "Let me try," Taemin offered. He placed his hand on the communication console and closed his eyes. Immediately, the random signals began organizing themselves into patterns. Within minutes, he had isolated 3 distinct communication methods from different species. "The crystal ship uses harmonics," he explained to his amazed colleagues. "Their thoughts create music. The metal ship nearby uses quantum fluctuations, and the third one communicates through changes in electromagnetic fields." "You can understand all of that?" Heejin asked. "Not just understand," Taemin said, opening his eyes. "I can speak it." He activated the communication array and began transmitting on all three frequencies simultaneously. To Hyojin and Boram, it sounded like a complex symphony of electronic sounds. But somehow they knew he was greeting the aliens. The response came quickly. The crystal ship transmitted a message that made the air in the station vibrate with beautiful, impossible music. At the same time, patterns of light began forming outside the viewport. "They want to meet," Taemin translated. "They're asking permission to come aboard. Should we let them?" Boram asked nervously. "We don't really have a choice," Hyojin pointed out. "If they wanted to harm us, they could have done it already." An hour later, three completely different beings materialized in the station's cargo bay. The transportation method was beyond human understanding, but Taemin seemed unsurprised by their arrival. The first being looked like a living crystal formation, tall and graceful, with light flowing through its transparent body. The second was clearly artificial, a sophisticated robot with sleek metal surfaces and glowing circuits. The third appeared to be made of pure energy, its form shifting and changing like controlled lightning. "I am Ambassador Krindel of the Nexari," the crystal being said, its voice creating harmonics that resonated through the station. "This is computational prime Zeth9 of the Vorthok, and energy pattern Velra of the Luminari." Hyojin stepped forward nervously. "Welcome to our research station. I'm Dr. Hyojin Kim. This is Boram Lee, and this is Taemin Park." All three aliens immediately focused their attention on Taemin. Their different forms of scanning technology converged on him, and he could feel their amazement. "Impossible," Zeth9 stated in a mechanical voice. "This biological entity shows quantum coherence at the cellular level. Such evolution should require millions of years. The energy patterns are unprecedented," Velra added, its voice like controlled thunder. "How did your species achieve this level of development?" Taemin looked at his human colleagues before answering. "We didn't, at least not intentionally. I was changed by artifacts we found on this planet." Krindel's crystal body began glowing brighter. "Show us these artifacts." In the laboratory, the three aliens studied the quantum crystals with instruments that appeared and disappeared like magic. Their scans revealed information that amazed even Taemin. "These are predecessor crystals," Krindel announced with something like awe in its harmonic voice. "We have legends about such artifacts, but none of our species have ever found functioning examples. The computational complexity stored within each crystal exceeds our most advanced systems," Zeth9 added. "The mathematical principles involved are beyond current understanding." Velra flickered with excitement. "These crystals have been waiting for the right kind of mind to activate them." "But why Taemin?" Hyojin asked. "What makes human minds special?" The three aliens exchanged what could only be described as glances, despite their vastly different forms. "That," Krindel said slowly, "is what we have come to determine." Over the following days, the aliens conducted tests that pushed Taemin's abilities to new limits. They presented him with mathematical problems that had puzzled their greatest minds for centuries. He solved them in minutes. They showed him technology from a dozen different species. He understood and improved upon each design effortlessly. Most impressive of all, when they shared their most advanced scientific theories, Taemin not only grasped them instantly but pointed out flaws and suggested corrections. "This is unprecedented," Zeth9 admitted during a private conference between the three species. "A single individual from a primitive species demonstrating capabilities beyond our most advanced civilizations. The question," Velra observed, "is whether this represents the potential of his entire species, or if he is a unique anomaly." Krindel's crystal form pulsed with deep thought. "Either possibility has profound implications for the galaxy. We must report this to the collective council immediately." Meanwhile, Hyojin and Boram watched their friend interact with beings whose technology and knowledge spanned thousands of years. What amazed them most was that Taemin remained fundamentally himself, kind and curious despite his growing powers. "Do you think this changes everything?" Boram asked quietly. Hyojin watched as Taemin effortlessly operated an alien device that had baffled its creators. "I think," she said slowly, "everything was always going to change. We just didn't know it yet." The alien ships prepared to depart, carrying news that would shake the foundations of galactic civilization. Humanity, the young species they had barely noticed, had produced an individual whose abilities surpassed anything they had achieved. The age of human insignificance was ending. Word spread across the galaxy faster than anyone expected. Within 6 weeks of the first contact, Research Station Kepler 442b had become the most important location in known space. Ships from 12 different species filled the orbit around the planet, creating a floating city of alien technology. Hyejin stood in the newly expanded communication center, trying to manage conversations with beings whose names she couldn't even pronounce. The ethereals want to test philosophical reasoning, she reported to Taemin. The architects are bringing geometric puzzles that have stumped them for 10,000 years. Boram looked up from her engineering station, which now connected to alien systems she was still learning to understand. And the Synaxi hive mind wants to challenge you with social problems involving millions of individuals. I'm not even sure how that's supposed to work. Taemin sat calmly in the center of what had once been their small laboratory. Around him floated dozens of alien devices, each one representing the pinnacle of achievement for its species. He was studying them all simultaneously while maintaining conversations in 17 different languages. It works because each challenge is really asking the same question, he explained, his voice carrying the same harmonic undertones that had developed since his transformation. They all want to know if human consciousness can truly surpass what they've achieved through millions of years of evolution. The first major test came from the energy-based Luminari. Their representative, a being called Flux Prime, materialized in the laboratory as controlled lightning shaped into roughly humanoid form. We present the Stellar Engineering Challenge, Flux Prime announced, its voice like controlled thunder. Our greatest minds have spent 3,000 years trying to stabilize a dying star in the Kepler system. The mathematics involved require understanding of 17 different types of energy. Interaction. Flux Prime projected a three-dimensional hologram showing a massive red giant star surrounded by complex machinery. Our current solution extends the star's life by only 50 years. We need a method to restore it to stable burning for at least 10,000 years. Taemin studied the hologram for less than 5 minutes. His enhanced perception allowed him to see not just the visible structures, but the quantum interactions between different energy systems, the gravitational effects of nearby planets, and the star's internal nuclear processes. The problem isn't the machinery, he said finally. You're trying to add energy to a system that's already too energetic. Instead, you need to create controlled collapse zones that compress the star's outer layers, while redirecting the excess energy into dimensional storage. He gestured, and the hologram began changing, showing new configurations that made the alien engineers gasp. Use your existing energy manipulation technology to create 17 synchronized compression fields. The star will actually become more stable than it was in its youth. Flux Prime flickered with what could only be amazement. The energy equations. They're perfect. This solution would work for any dying star. You've just revolutionized stellar engineering. Before anyone could fully process this success, the crystalline Nexari presented their challenge. Ambassador Crindel's body resonated with complex harmonics as it spoke. We offer the Harmony of Creation puzzle, Crindel announced. Our species communicates through crystal resonance, but we have never been able to create new forms of matter using sound alone. Our greatest musicians and scientists have attempted this for 50,000 years. Taemin listened to the harmonic patterns that Crindel produced, but instead of just hearing them, he could perceive the quantum effects each frequency created in nearby matter. Within minutes, he began producing his own sounds that made the air itself shimmer. As his voice rose and fell in patterns no human throat should have been able to create, atoms in the laboratory began rearranging themselves. First, simple geometric patterns appeared in the air. Then more complex structures formed, including materials that had never existed before. Impossible, Crindel whispered, its crystal form pulsing with shock. You're creating stable matter from pure acoustic energy. Our species' greatest dream, achieved by a being who learned our communication method 6 weeks ago. The tests continued for days. The machine-based Vorthak presented computational problems that had occupied their most advanced artificial minds for centuries. Taemin solved them by thinking in ways that transcended pure logic, using intuition and creativity that their mechanical minds couldn't replicate. The ancient architects, beings older than most stars, brought geometric puzzles based on the fundamental structure of reality itself. They watched in stunned silence as Taemin manipulated space-time, to create shapes that existed in more dimensions than their mathematics could describe. Most challenging was the test from the hive-minded synaxy. Thousands of individual beings connected into a single consciousness presented Taman with a social scenario involving the management of a planet with 50 billion inhabitants. From dozens of different species, our hive mind can process the needs and desires of millions simultaneously, their collective voice explained. But even we cannot solve the resource allocation problem for this theoretical world. The variables are too complex, the competing interests too numerous. Taman closed his eyes and let his consciousness expand. Instead of trying to process all the information logically, he began to feel the emotional patterns of the theoretical population. He sensed their fears, hopes, and dreams as if they were real people standing beside him. The solution isn't mathematical, he said after 20 minutes of deep concentration. It's emotional. Every species has different needs, but they all want the same things: safety, purpose, and growth. Create zones where each species can thrive according to their nature, but link them through shared projects that require cooperation. His solution involved creating a planet-wide network of interconnected communities, each designed for specific species but dependent on others for resources and knowledge. The synaxy hive mind processed his proposal and fell silent for several minutes. This approach would create stable prosperity for over 97% of the population, they finally announced. Our best projections never exceeded 70%. You have solved a problem we thought was impossible. As word of each success spread through the gathered fleet, reactions varied dramatically among the different species. Some, like the peaceful ethereals, were fascinated and wanted to learn more about human thought processes. Others, particularly the militaristic Thenori, grew increasingly uncomfortable with what they were witnessing. Hye-jin noticed the growing tension during her diplomatic meetings with various species representatives. Some of them are afraid, she reported to Boram during a quiet moment. They're starting to realize that one human with enhanced abilities might be more capable than their entire civilizations. Boram was monitoring the energy readings from Taman's various demonstrations. That's not the scary part, she said quietly. The scary part is that he's still holding back. Look at these power readings. He's using maybe 10% of what the crystals actually gave him. Meanwhile, Taman continued solving challenges that had puzzled advanced species for millennia, but he was beginning to sense something troubling in the quantum background radiation around the planet. Some of the alien ships were charging weapon systems, and defensive shields were being raised. Hye-jin, he said during a brief break between tests, I think we need to prepare for the possibility that not everyone is happy about what's happening here. She looked at the displays showing dozens of alien vessels in orbit. Some were clearly research ships, but others had the unmistakable profiles of warships. What do we do? She asked. Taman's eyes swirled with blue-green light as he gazed up at the alien fleet. We prove that being powerful doesn't mean being dangerous, and we hope that's enough to prevent a war. The tests were ending, but the real challenge was just beginning. 3 days after the final challenges ended, Taman made a discovery that changed everything. He was alone in the laboratory early in the morning, studying the quantum crystals that had transformed him, when something unusual happened. The crystals began resonating with each other in patterns he had never seen before. Hye-jin, Boram, you need to see this, he called through the communication system. His 2 colleagues rushed to the laboratory to find Taman standing in the center of a circle of floating crystals. But these weren't the same 12 crystals they had started with. Somehow there were now dozens of them, and they were all glowing with intense blue-green light. Where did the extra crystals come from? Boram asked, checking her instruments in confusion. They were always here, Taman replied, his voice filled with wonder, hidden in the quantum spaces between dimensions. The original 12 were just the visible part of something much larger. As he spoke, the crystals began projecting holographic images into the air around them. The images showed scenes from across the galaxy, but from long ago. Ancient cities of impossible beauty stretched across countless worlds. Beings of pure energy danced through space itself, shaping stars and planets with their thoughts. What are we looking at? Hye-jin whispered. The predecessors, Taman said, his enhanced perception allowing him to understand the images in ways his friends could not. The species that came before all the others. They didn't just disappear, they evolved beyond physical existence. The holographic scenes shifted to show the predecessors in their final days as physical beings. They were preparing for something, creating vast networks of the quantum crystals and placing them on worlds throughout the galaxy. They were planning for this moment, Taemin continued, his voice growing excited. They knew that eventually a species would evolve with the right kind of consciousness to use these crystals. They were waiting for minds that could think creatively, solve problems in new ways, and grow beyond their original limitations. The images showed predecessor scientists studying the genetic patterns of countless species across the galaxy. They had watched the evolution of the Nexari, the Vorthak, the Luminari, and dozens of others. But none of them had the qualities the predecessors were looking for. Then the hologram showed Earth, young and primitive, with early humans just beginning to develop language and tools. They chose us, Heejin breathed, staring at the images of their ancient ancestors. Before we even knew other species existed, they chose humanity. Not just chose, Taemin corrected, his understanding deepening as more information flowed from the crystals. They guided our evolution subtly over millions of years. The creativity that makes us human, our ability to think outside normal patterns, our capacity for emotional reasoning, the predecessors influenced all of it. Boram was frantically recording everything on her instruments. But why? What made them think humans would be special? The answer came in the form of more holographic images. The predecessors showed their own history, how they had achieved incredible technological advancement but had eventually reached limits that pure logic and calculation could not overcome. They needed something different, something that could transcend the boundaries of purely rational thought. They found it in human neural plasticity, Taemin explained as the information continued flowing into his consciousness. Our brains can rewire themselves in ways that other species cannot. We can hold contradictory ideas simultaneously and find truth in paradox. We can make intuitive leaps that bypass logical steps entirely. The holographic display shifted again, showing the current galaxy with all its advanced civilizations. Lines of light connected each species to networks of hidden predecessor crystals on their worlds. The crystals are everywhere, Taemin realized with growing amazement. On every world with intelligent life. But they only activate for the right kind of mind. You mean there could be others like you? Heejin asked. Not like me, Taemin said, studying the galactic map. The crystals are programmed to activate only when a species reaches the right level of development and demonstrates the necessary mental characteristics. Humanity is the first to meet all the requirements. Suddenly alarms began sounding throughout the research station. Boram rushed to her monitoring station and her face went pale. We have incoming signals from the alien fleet, she reported. They're detecting the energy surge from the crystals, and some of the ships are moving into attack positions. Through the viewport, they could see several of the more militaristic vessels breaking away from the main fleet and approaching the research station. Leading them was a massive black ship with the distinctive angular design of the Thenori warfleet. They're scared, Taemin said, still connected to the quantum network of crystals. The Thenori have been the dominant military power in this region for thousands of years. They can't accept that a young species like humanity might be their superior. The communication system crackled to life with the harsh, aggressive voice of a Thenori commander. Human Research Station, this is War Leader Krathvel of the Thenori Empire. You will surrender the enhanced human immediately, or we will take him by force. Before anyone could respond, other voices joined the communication channel. Ambassador Krindel of the Nexari spoke with urgent harmonics. War Leader, this action is premature. The human has shown no hostile intentions. The human represents a threat to galactic stability, Krathvel replied coldly. One being with such power cannot be allowed to exist without proper control. Computational Prime Zeth 9 of the Vorthak added its mechanical voice to the debate. Our analysis indicates that the human's abilities, while unprecedented, do not automatically constitute a threat. Further study is required. Study can be conducted after we have secured the subject, the Thenori commander snapped. All ships not affiliated with the Thenori Empire have 1 hour to withdraw from this system. Heejin looked at Taemin with concern. What do we do? Taemin was still absorbing information from the predecessor crystals, learning about technologies and capabilities that had been hidden for millions of years. We show them the truth, he said finally. The predecessors didn't create these crystals to make weapons. They created them to help all species evolve beyond their current limitations. The holographic display around them expanded, showing not just the local galaxy, but neighboring galaxies as well. Everywhere the same pattern repeated. Networks of quantum crystals waiting on countless worlds, left by predecessor civilizations that had transcended physical existence eons ago. This isn't about one human becoming powerful. Taman continued, his voice filled with awe. This is about the next stage of evolution for all intelligent life. The predecessors are still out there, in forms we can barely comprehend, waiting to guide us all to something greater. Outside, the Thenori ships continued their approach, weapons charging and shields raised. But now other ships were also moving, some supporting the Thenori position while others opposed it. The peaceful gathering of species was rapidly turning into the largest military confrontation in galactic history. Tae-min, Boram said urgently. The Thenori flagship just locked weapons on the research station. They're not planning to negotiate. Tae-min looked at his human friends, then at the massive alien fleet preparing for battle. The quantum crystals around him pulsed with increasing intensity, responding to his emotions in the growing crisis. Then I guess it's time to show them what the predecessors really intended, he said, his eyes blazing with blue-green light, and hope that they understand the difference between power and wisdom before someone makes a terrible mistake. The crystals rose higher into the air, forming complex geometric patterns that seemed to bend space itself. Whatever was about to happen, it would determine not just the fate of humanity, but the future of all intelligent life in the galaxy. The real test was about to begin. The attack came without warning. War leader Krathvel had grown tired of waiting and debate. His massive Thenori flagship fired its primary weapon, a beam of concentrated antimatter that could destroy entire space stations in seconds. But the beam never reached research station Kepler 442b. Instead, it struck something invisible just a few hundred meters from the station and simply stopped. The deadly energy spread out in all directions like water hitting a glass wall, creating beautiful patterns of light that should have been impossible. What is happening out there? Boram shouted, staring at her instruments in confusion. The attack should have destroyed us, but something blocked it completely. Taemin stood in the center of the laboratory, surrounded by dozens of floating quantum crystals that pulsed with intense blue-green light. His eyes were closed, but somehow he was aware of everything happening in the space around the planet. I created a barrier, he said calmly, as if stopping antimatter weapons was something he did every day. The crystals taught me how to crystallize space-time itself. The Thenori beam can't pass through solid space. Hyejin watched through the viewport as more Thenori ships opened fire. Plasma cannons, gravity weapons, and reality disruption beams all struck the invisible barrier around the research station. None of them got through. This is impossible, came the angry voice of war leader Krathvel over the communication system. No known technology can stop our weapons. That's because it's not technology, Taemin replied, opening his eyes to reveal swirling galaxies of light within them. It's applied understanding of how the universe actually works. The Thenori commander's response was to order his entire fleet to concentrate their fire on the research station. 23 warships unleashed their full power simultaneously. The space around the station blazed with enough energy to destroy small moons. Taemin didn't even seem to strain as he absorbed and redirected all that destructive force. The energy flowed around the barrier he had created, spreading harmlessly into the vacuum of space where it formed beautiful aurora-like displays. Your weapons cannot harm us, Taemin announced, his voice somehow reaching every ship in the fleet. But I'm not interested in fighting you. I want to show you something that your anger is preventing you from seeing. With a gesture, he caused the barrier around the station to expand outward, but instead of being solid, it became transparent, and images began forming within it. The same holographic records that the crystals had shown. Him began playing for the entire alien fleet to see ships that had been preparing for battle suddenly found themselves surrounded by scenes from the distant past. The history of the predecessors played out in 3 dimensions around them, showing the ancient species' evolution from physical beings to something beyond current understanding. The predecessors didn't disappear, Taemin explained as the images continued. They transcended, but they left these crystals behind as a gift for species that could learn to think beyond their limitations. Some of the alien ships began backing away from the battle formation as their crews watched the holographic display. The peaceful ethereals were the first to understand what they were seeing. These are historical records, came the amazed voice of Elder Wise Dream from the ethereal vessel. The predecessors actually existed. They were real. But war leader Krathvel was not impressed by ancient history. Illusions and tricks will not save you, human. If our weapons cannot reach you, we will use other methods. The Thenori flagship began charging its reality disruption weapon, a device that could unmake matter at the quantum level. But as the weapon powered up, something unexpected happened. Taman reached out with his enhanced consciousness and began to understand the weapon itself. He could see every circuit, every power relay, every quantum field generator that made it function, and then he began to improve it. "What are you doing to our systems?" Krathvel demanded as his weapon displays began showing readings that should have been impossible. "I'm showing you what these weapons could become with proper understanding," Taman replied. "Your reality disruption beam could be transformed into a reality creation beam. Instead of destroying matter, it could create new forms of life." The Thenori weapon, under Taimin's influence, began to glow with the same blue-green light as the crystals. When Krathvel fired it in desperation, it didn't destroy anything. Instead, it created a small but beautiful garden of crystalline plants that began growing in the vacuum of space. Similar transformations began happening to weapons throughout the Thenori fleet. Plasma cannons became tools for creating new stars. Gravity weapons started generating fields that could support life on previously uninhabitable worlds. Antimatter beams transformed into streams of pure creative energy. "This is what the predecessors wanted," Taman said as he continued to reprogram the fleet's weapons. "Not the power to destroy, but the wisdom to create." War leader Krathvel's voice shook with rage and confusion. "You have violated our ships. You have changed our weapons without permission. This is an act of war." "No," Taman replied gently. "This is an act of education." But Krathvel was beyond reasoning. He ordered his personal guard ships to ram the research station directly, willing to sacrifice his own people rather than admit that a human might be superior to his species. 12. Thenori ships accelerated toward the station at maximum speed. Even Taman's barrier wouldn't be able to stop the kinetic impact of that much mass moving at high velocity. So he did something else instead. As the ships approached, Taman reached out with his consciousness and gently touched the mind of each Thenori pilot. He didn't force them to stop or control their actions. Instead, he simply showed them what they were really doing. One by one, the attacking pilots saw themselves through Taman's eyes. They saw their own fear and anger, but they also saw the beauty of what the crystals were offering. They saw the possibility of their species growing beyond its current limitations. All 12 ships stopped just meters from the station. Their pilots sat in stunned silence as they processed what they had experienced. "I felt your thoughts," whispered the voice of one young Thenori pilot. "You could have destroyed us all, but you chose to help us understand instead." War leader Krathvel's voice came over the communication system one last time, but now it was filled with defeat rather than anger. "What are you, human? What have you become?" Taman looked out at the fleet of ships surrounding the research station. Some were still hostile, others were confused, and a few were beginning to understand what was really happening. "I've become what the predecessors always intended," he said simply. "Not a weapon or a conqueror, but a teacher. Someone who can help others see beyond their current limitations." Hijin and Boram watched in amazement as hostile ships throughout the fleet began powering down their weapons. The greatest military confrontation in galactic history was ending not with destruction, but with understanding. "Is it over?" Boram asked. Taman smiled, but his expression remained cautious. "This battle is over, but now comes the harder part. Convincing an entire galaxy to accept that everything they thought they knew about power and evolution needs to change." Around them, the quantum crystals continued to pulse with gentle light, ready to help guide not just humanity, but all intelligent species toward their next stage of development. The real work was just beginning. But first, they had to survive the political earthquake that was about to shake every civilization in the galaxy. 2 weeks after the failed Thenori attack, representatives from every major civilization in the galaxy gathered in the largest conference room aboard the Nexari flagship. The room had been expanded using predecessor crystal technology that Taman had shared, allowing beings of vastly different sizes and environmental needs to meet comfortably together. Ambassador Kryn Del of the Nexari stood at the center of the crystalline chamber, its body resonating with formal harmonics. "We are here to address a reality that none of our species anticipated. The human known as Taman Park has demonstrated capabilities that exceed our combined civilizations. Murmurs filled the room in dozens of different languages. The ethereals whispered among themselves in their musical tongue. The Vorthak exchanged rapid data bursts. Even the usually silent architects were communicating through subtle shifts in their geometric forms. Computational Prime Zeth 9 spoke first, its mechanical voice cutting through the noise. Our analysis is complete. The human's abilities are not limited to the demonstrations we have witnessed. Based on energy readings and quantum signatures, he is operating at approximately 12% of his actual capacity. A shocked silence fell over the assembly. Elder Wise Dream of the Ethereals was the first to respond. 12%? Are you certain of this calculation? The probability of error is less than 0.001%, Zeth 9 confirmed. If the human chose to use his full capabilities, he could restructure matter on a planetary scale, manipulate gravity fields across entire star systems, and possibly even affect the fundamental laws of physics within a limited region of space. War leader Krath Vel, who had requested to attend despite his recent defeat, stood with visible difficulty. His pride as a Thenori warrior had been deeply wounded by the ease with which Taman had neutralized his fleet. Then we have no choice, he said grimly. We must acknowledge human superiority and accept whatever terms this Taman chooses to impose upon us. Actually, came a familiar voice from the chamber's entrance. That's not what I want at all. Taman entered the room accompanied by Hyajin and Boram. His appearance had continued to evolve over the past weeks. The blue-green patterns in his eyes now extended in subtle lines across his skin, and when he moved, the space around him seemed to shimmer slightly. You don't want to rule us? Asked Constructor Prime Velthon of the Architects, its massive stone-like form shifting to better observe the human. Rule is the wrong concept entirely, Taman replied, taking a position where all species could see him clearly. The predecessors didn't leave these crystals so that one species could dominate others. They left them so that all species could grow beyond their current limitations. He gestured, and holographic displays appeared throughout the chamber, showing star maps marked with thousands of crystal locations. There are predecessor crystals on every world with intelligent life, but they're programmed to activate only when a species demonstrates the right combination of creativity, wisdom, and emotional growth. Yijin stepped forward to address the assembly. What Taman is proposing isn't human dominance, it's cooperative evolution. Each species has unique strengths that the others lack. Explain this proposal more clearly, requested Flux Prime of the Luminari, its energy form flickering with interest. Taman activated a new holographic display showing the galaxy divided into interconnected zones. Instead of the current system where each species develops independently, I suggest we create the Galactic Synthesis Council. Each species contributes what they do best while learning from the others. Boram added her technical perspective. The Vorthak have the most advanced computational systems. The Nexari understand energy manipulation better than anyone. The Luminari can work with stellar phenomena. The Ethereals have the deepest philosophical insights. Each species brings something unique to the collective. And humans? Asked Elder Wise Dream. What do your people contribute to this synthesis? Integration, Taman replied. Human consciousness can bridge the gaps between different types of thinking. We can help translate Vorthak logic into ethereal wisdom, or combine Nexari energy techniques with architect structural engineering. The chamber erupted in discussions as representatives debated among themselves. Some species were intrigued by the possibilities, while others worried about losing their independence. This is a pleasant theory, War Leader Krathvel said skeptically, but why should we trust that humans won't simply use this council to control us more subtly? Instead of answering with words, Taman did something that shocked everyone present. He began to share his power. Starting with Ambassador Krindel, Taman placed his hand on the Nexari's crystalline surface. Immediately, Krindel's body began glowing brighter as new harmonics became possible. The crystal being could suddenly perceive quantum interactions it had never noticed before. I can see the connections between all energy in this room, Krindel said with amazement. The barriers between different energy types are dissolving. Moving around the chamber, Taman briefly touched representatives from each species, sharing carefully limited portions of the understanding he had gained from the predecessor crystals. He enhanced the Vorthak's processing capabilities, expanded the Ethereal's philosophical perception, and even helped the rigid architects see new geometric possibilities. This is what cooperation looks like, Taemin explained, as the enhanced beings marveled at their new abilities. Not one species hoarding power, but all species growing together. The effect on the assembly was immediate and profound. Species that had been suspicious moments before were now eagerly discussing how they could contribute to the proposed synthesis. Computational Prime Zeth-9 processed the new information at unprecedented speeds. The mathematical models are compelling. A cooperative system would advance all species faster than independent development. The philosophical implications are extraordinary, Elder-Wise Dream added. Individual growth through collective wisdom. It aligns with our deepest spiritual principles. Even war leader Krathvel seemed moved by what he was witnessing. You could have taken everything from us by force. Instead, you offer to make us stronger. This is not how conquerors behave. Because I'm not a conqueror, Taemin said simply. I'm a teacher who has been given extraordinary tools. The predecessors didn't transcend by dominating others. They transcended by helping everyone grow. Over the following hours, the framework for the Galactic Synthesis Council took shape. Each species would maintain their autonomy while contributing to shared projects. The Vorthak would handle computational challenges that required pure logic. The Nexari would manage energy-based phenomena. The Ethereals would provide wisdom for philosophical and ethical dilemmas. Hyejin was appointed as the primary human representative, charged with coordinating between different species' communication methods and cultural approaches. Boram would lead the technical integration teams, helping to merge technologies from different civilizations. What about you? Asked Constructor Prime Velthon. What will be your role in this new system? Taemin smiled, and for a moment the cosmic power within him was hidden behind simple human warmth. I'll be what I've always been, a scientist who asks questions and looks for answers. Except now I'll have the greatest laboratory in the galaxy to work with. As the representatives prepared to return to their home worlds with news of the new alliance, Ambassador Krindel approached Taemin with a question that had been troubling many of them. The enhancements you gave us today are remarkable, but they are limited. Will you eventually share the full extent of your abilities? Taemin looked out at the stars through the chamber's transparent walls. When each species is ready. The predecessors learned that giving too much power too quickly leads to destruction. But as we all grow together, as we learn to use wisdom alongside power, more will become possible. The seeds of a new galactic civilization had been planted. Now came the much harder task of helping it grow into something worthy of the predecessor's ancient dream. But first, there were thousands of worlds to visit and millions of minds to awaken to new possibilities. 5 years had passed since the formation of the Galactic Synthesis Council, and the galaxy was unrecognizable from what it had been before. Dr. Hyejin Kim stood on the observation deck of Unity Station, the massive structure that now orbited Earth and served as the Council's headquarters. Through the transparent walls, she could see ships from dozens of species arriving and departing in peaceful cooperation. The morning reports are ready, Bo Ramley announced as she approached with a datapad that combined human technology with improvements from 6 different alien species. The joint research projects are exceeding all expectations. Hyejin smiled as she reviewed the information. The Nexari Vorthak collaboration had developed new forms of crystalline computing that thought with both logic and intuition. The Ethereal Architect Partnership had created buildings that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Most remarkably, the Luminari had worked with human engineers to build stars that burned with controlled fusion, providing clean energy to entire star systems. Where is Taemin today? Hyejin asked. Sector 7, helping the Wanderer species with their crystal activation. Boram replied. He should be back tonight. The Wanderers had been the most recent species to successfully activate their predecessor crystals. Like humanity, they possessed the rare combination of creativity and wisdom needed to unlock the ancient technology. But unlike Taemin's dramatic transformation, their awakening had been gradual and guided. Across the galaxy, 23 species had now activated their crystals with Taemin's help. Each activation brought new perspectives and capabilities to the growing alliance. The process had become a celebration rather than the crisis it had been when Taemin first changed. A communication alert drew Hyejin's attention to the central display. The holographic image of Elder-Wise Dream appeared, the ethereal's energy form shimmering with excitement. Ambassador Kim, the being said in its musical voice, "We have detected something extraordinary. Long-range sensors are picking up structured signals from outside our galaxy. Boram's eyes widened. You mean from other galaxies entirely? The signals match the quantum signatures we have learned to associate with predecessor technology. Elder Wise Dream continued. It appears that their experiment was not limited to our galaxy alone. Before either human could respond, the space around Unity Station began to shimmer. Taemin materialized on the observation deck, using transportation methods that still amazed his friends even after 5 years. I felt the disturbance in the quantum field, he said, his appearance now more energy than matter, though he maintained a recognizably human form out of consideration for others. The signals are coming from the Andromeda Galaxy. Another experiment like ours? Hyojin asked. Taemin nodded, his eyes swirling with patterns that seemed to contain entire star systems. The predecessors seeded multiple galaxies with their crystals. Each one was designed to develop differently, to explore various paths of evolution and consciousness. Over the following weeks, teams from the Galactic Synthesis Council worked to decode the signals from Andromeda. What they discovered was both thrilling and humbling. The neighboring galaxy had developed along completely different lines, with species that had transcended physical limitations in ways that the Milky Way civilizations had never imagined. They communicate through modifications to space-time itself, Boram reported during a council meeting. Their thoughts actually changed the fabric of reality in small regions around them, and they appear to be reaching out to us, added Computational Prime, Seth 9. The signals contain mathematical proofs that seem designed to test our understanding of advanced physics. Taemin studied the alien mathematics with growing excitement. They want to know if we're ready for the next stage. Next stage of what? Asked war leader Krathvel, who had become one of Taemin's most dedicated supporters after seeing the benefits of cooperation. Intergalactic cooperation, Taemin replied. The predecessors didn't just want individual species to evolve. They wanted entire galaxies to grow and eventually merge their knowledge and capabilities. The implications were staggering. If the Andromeda civilizations were as far beyond the Milky Way species as Taemin was beyond normal humans, the potential for growth was limitless. Ambassador Krindel resonated with harmonics of concern. Are we prepared for such contact? Our own synthesis is still developing. Taemin considered the question carefully. Over the past 5 years, he had guided the gradual transformation of galactic civilization, always careful not to push too fast or too hard. The lesson of the predecessors was clear. Wisdom had to develop alongside power. We're not ready yet, he admitted, but we will be. And when that time comes, humanity will help bridge the gap between our civilizations just as we've bridged the gaps between species here. As if in response to his words, alerts began sounding throughout Unity Station. Boram rushed to her instruments while Hyojin contacted the various fleet commanders. What is it? Taemin asked, though his enhanced senses were already providing him with the answer. Ships approaching from Earth, Boram reported with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Lots of ships. It looks like the entire Earth defense fleet, plus civilian vessels. Over 3,000 ships in total. Through the observation windows, they could see the approaching armada. 5 years of shared alien technology had transformed human spaceflight capabilities dramatically. The ships were sleek combinations of human engineering and improvements from a dozen different species. They're requesting permission to join the Galactic Synthesis Council, Hyojin announced after receiving the official communication. The Earth government has voted unanimously to formally integrate with the galactic civilization. Taemin smiled with genuine warmth. For 5 years, Earth had remained cautiously independent, while their representatives worked with the alien species. Now finally, humanity as a whole was ready to take its place among the stars. And there's more, Hyojin continued, her voice filled with wonder. The ships aren't just carrying diplomats and scientists. They're carrying the first generation of naturally enhanced humans. Taemin's transformation had been artificial, triggered by the predecessor crystals. But over the past 5 years, human children born on Earth had begun showing signs of natural enhancement. Their neural patterns were more flexible, their intuitive capabilities stronger, and their ability to understand alien concepts more developed than previous generations. Evolution doesn't stop, Taemin observed as he watched the Earth fleet approach. The crystals awakened something in humanity, but that awakening is spreading naturally now. Over the following months, Earth's integration into galactic civilization proceeded smoothly. Human colonies spread to dozens of worlds, each one becoming a center of cooperation between species. Human children played with young Nexari, crystal beings, while their parents worked alongside adult aliens on projects that would have seemed like magic just a decade earlier. The most remarkable development was the discovery that other humans could undergo controlled crystal enhancement. Unlike Taemin's dramatic transformation, these new enhancements were gradual and tailored to each individual's capabilities and interests. Soon there were human specialists who could communicate with any species, solve problems that stumped entire civilizations, or create art that moved beings across the galaxy to tears of joy. "We're becoming what the predecessors always intended," Taemin said during a quiet moment with his oldest friends. They stood in the same laboratory where his transformation had begun, now expanded into a research center that spanned multiple dimensions. "And what's that?" Boram asked. "Gardeners," he replied, looking out at the thriving galactic civilization they had helped create. Gardeners of consciousness, helping every form of intelligent life grow into its full potential. The signals from Andromeda continued to arrive, growing stronger and more complex as the Milky Way civilizations developed their ability to understand them. One day, Taemin knew, they would be ready for that next great leap. But for now, there was still so much growing to do. Across the galaxy, on thousands of worlds, predecessor crystals waited for the right minds to awaken them. Each activation brought new perspectives, new possibilities, and new hope for the future. Humanity had become the shepherds of galactic evolution, not through conquest or domination, but through the simple recognition that everyone grew stronger when everyone grew together. As Taemin looked out at the stars, he could sense the vast networks of consciousness spreading throughout the galaxy, all connected by the quantum threads the predecessors had woven millions of years ago. The experiment was working exactly as intended. The age of isolation was ending. The age of synthesis had begun, and somewhere in the spaces between galaxies, beings of unimaginable wisdom smiled at what their children had accomplished and prepared to welcome them into an even greater community among the stars.